The night air hung thick over Los Angeles on the 8th of August, 1969. Behind the gates of 10050 Cielo Drive, 26-year-old Sharon Tate sat with friends in the living room of her Benedict Canyon home. She was 8.5 months pregnant. Her husband, director Roman Polanski, was away filming in London. She had no reason to believe this wouldn't be just another warm summer evening in the Hollywood Hills. But somewhere in the darkness, a rusted Ford was already climbing the canyon road, carrying 4 people with knives, rope, and instructions from a man who called himself Jesus Christ. By sunrise, 5 people inside that house would be dead, and the word pig would be scrawled in blood on the front door. What happened that night didn't just terrify a city. It shattered an entire generation's belief that love and peace could save the world, and the man who ordered it all never personally killed a single one of them. Charles Mills Manson was born on the 12th of November, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a 16-year-old girl named Kathleen Maddox. His father was never confirmed. His mother was an alcoholic who, according to court records, once traded her infant son for a pitcher of beer at a bar. By the time Manson was 9 years old, he had already been placed in a boys' home. By 13, he had committed his first armed robbery. Over the next 2 decades, Manson spent more than half his life behind bars. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, by the time he was released from Terminal Island Penitentiary in March of 1967, he had spent 17 of his 32 years incarcerated. He reportedly begged the guards not to let him go. He told them he didn't know how to function in the outside world. They released him anyway. He walked out into San Francisco at the exact moment the summer of love was about to begin. San Francisco in 1967 was flooded with young people, many of them runaways, many of them already broken by the families they had left behind. They were searching for meaning, for belonging, for someone to tell them the world made sense. Charles Manson, a career criminal with an 8th-grade education, had spent his entire adult life learning how to manipulate people inside prison. He had studied Dale Carnegie. He had absorbed Scientology techniques from a fellow inmate. He had learned to play guitar, and now, standing in the Haight-Ashbury district, he found an endless supply of vulnerable, idealistic young people who would believe anything he said. He started collecting followers, mostly women at first, young women from middle-class families who had dropped out of society and were looking for a father figure, a guru, a reason to exist. He used drugs, particularly LSD, to break down their psychological defenses. He used sex to bond them together. He used isolation to cut them off from anyone who might challenge his authority. Within a year, he had assembled what would become known as the Manson Family, a group that, at its peak, numbered roughly 100 members, though the core group consisted of about 24 devoted followers who lived communally at the Spawn Movie Ranch, an old Western film set in the hills northwest of Los Angeles. Manson had a vision, or at least, he had a narrative. He took the Beatles' White Album, released in November of 1968, and wove it into an elaborate prophecy he called Helter Skelter, borrowing the name from one of the album's tracks. According to Manson, the song was a coded message predicting an apocalyptic race war between black and white Americans. He told his followers that black Americans would rise up, slaughter the white population, and then, unable to govern themselves because Manson believed they were inferior, they would turn to him and his family, who would have been hiding in a bottomless pit in Death Valley, to lead the new world. The racism at the core of this delusion was breathtaking. The fact that anyone believed it was terrifying. When the race war didn't start on its own, Manson decided he would have to ignite it himself. He would send his followers to commit murders in wealthy white neighborhoods and make it appear as though black revolutionaries were responsible. On the night of the 8th of August, 1969, Manson sent Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian to 10050 Cielo Drive. Manson had previously visited the property when music producer Terry Melcher, the son of Doris Day, lived there. Melcher had rejected Manson's music. He had since moved out. Manson likely knew this, but the address represented something to him. It represented the Hollywood establishment that had refused to accept him. What happened inside that house defies comprehension. The 4 intruders murdered 5 people. Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old visitor, was shot in his car in the driveway. Jay Sebring, a celebrity hairstylist, was shot and stabbed 7 times. Abigail Folger, a coffee heiress, was stabbed 28 times. Wojtek Frykowski, Folger's boyfriend, was shot twice, struck over the head 13 times, and stabbed 51 times. And Sharon Tate, she was stabbed 16 times. She begged for her life. She begged them to spare her unborn child. Susan Atkins later testified that she told Tate, quote, "I don't care about you or your baby." The Los Angeles County Coroner's report confirmed that Tate's son, who she had planned to name Paul Richard Polanski, was viable and died as a result of his mother's murder. The next night, Manson himself accompanied 6 of his followers to the home of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca in the Los Feliz neighborhood. He tied the couple up, then left, ordering his followers to kill them. Leno LaBianca was stabbed 26 times. A carving fork was left protruding from his abdomen. The word war was carved into his flesh. Rosemary LaBianca was stabbed 41 times. On the walls of their home, the killers wrote, "Death to pigs, rise," and the misspelled "helter skelter" in the victim's blood. Los Angeles was paralyzed with fear. Gun sales in the city spiked by 93% in the weeks following the murders, according to reports published in the Los Angeles Times. Private security companies saw their business double overnight. Nobody knew who was responsible. The city's wealthiest residents installed new locks, hired armed guards, and stopped sleeping. For months, the cases went unsolved. The break came from an unlikely source. Susan Atkins, arrested on an unrelated charge, began bragging about the murders to her cellmate, who immediately contacted authorities. The investigation, led by prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, unraveled the entire family. The trial began on the 15th of June, 1970, and it became one of the longest and most sensational criminal proceedings in American history, lasting nearly 10 months. Manson carved an X into his forehead during the trial, and his followers did the same. They camped outside the courthouse, shaving their heads and chanting. When Manson held up a newspaper headline reading, "Manson guilty," 4 female co-defendants stood up simultaneously and began chanting in Latin. On the 25th of January, 1971, Manson, Watson, Atkins, and Krenwinkel were all found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They were sentenced to death. However, in 1972, California's Supreme Court temporarily abolished the death penalty in the case of People v. Anderson, and their sentences were automatically commuted to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Over the following decades, each of them was denied parole repeatedly. Susan Atkins died of brain cancer in prison in 2009. Charles Manson died on the 19th of November 2017 at the age of 83 at a hospital in Kern County, California. He had spent 46 years behind bars, never once expressing genuine remorse. The Manson murders didn't just end lives, they ended an era. Journalist Joan Didion wrote that the 60s ended abruptly on the 9th of August, 1969. The dream of peace, love, and communal living suddenly looked naive, even dangerous. If a commune in the California hills could produce something this evil, then perhaps the counterculture wasn't the utopia its believers had promised. The innocence was gone, and it was never coming back. What Charles Manson proved, more than anything, is that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a 5'2" man with a guitar and a smile, standing in a field of wildflowers, telling broken people exactly what they want to hear. And that might be the most terrifying truth of all.